Testing, testing. Welcome back to segment 2 of I Don't Disagree, IDD, for those of you in the know. The non-competitive / sometimes competitive, sometimes agreeable, sometimes not, sometimes cocky, sometimes brash, whatever. That's mainly due to their hosts. I am RJ Miliaccio. It is Sunday night in the sweltering heat of the mid-sack. It is now, we are closing in on 10 o'clock in the east, almost not quite the witching hour yet. At last check, that game out there on the left coast, the Sunday night special, we're at the end of the eighth inning. They come in the ninth. The Dodgers are now on top 4-0, so pitching a shutout against the Padres. We will keep you updated on that one if it ends on our time here. We will certainly let you know. We are going to switch gears, though, and turn to the NFL. The Hall of Fame induction ceremony in Canton, Ohio was this weekend. They had 6 inductees. The candidates were Tony Baselli, who was an offensive tackle, wide receiver for the Raiders, Cliff Branch, who was a speedster. You had safety Leroy Butler, who hit like a truck. Then you had linebacker Sam Mills, who was just up and down the stalwart, and finally got in on his 20th attempt. This was his last one he got in, thank God. So good for him, because he was deserving. Richard Seymour, probably the most underrated defensive player of the last 20 years. But he's getting in the Hall of Fame, so how underrated is he? I'll explain that in a minute. And then Bryant Young, San Francisco. Also, Dick the Crier Vermeil got in. Dick the Tears, Dick the Weeping, whatever you want to call him, Dick Vermeil, got in. And the first referee, first official. I know how we spend half our time. You do it, I do it, we all do it. It's all about how many minutes before in a sporting event before you snap at the first official or umpire or something they do, or a call they miss. So they are the underrated, severely underrated portion of our sports lives, because without them there's no sports. Let's be honest. Okay, so but the NFL inducted its first official in the form of Art McNally. So congratulations to all those people. Quick note on Seymour, if you want to call it a quick note. This was the only good news I got this week, because the shit sucks. We're getting shit stuffed into their socks, or whatever I call it. But Seymour getting in was great, because if you just look at the numbers, they don't jump off the page. But and they weren't going to, because the way Belichick used him, it was not about numbers, it was about impact. And what I mean by impact, I mean, he's kind of the guy that wherever you put him on the defensive line, and they played him at every position on the defensive line. Okay, and he made five all-pro teams, all-pro. Okay, and every position he was at for his entire Patriot tenure, he was double-teamed. Didn't matter where you put him. Wherever Richard Seymour was, the line was shifting the blocking scheme to Richard Seymour. He was double-teamed literally every snap, okay, of his Patriot playing career. And if he wasn't, it was because they blitzed a linebacker off of his side. So you couldn't really double team him, or they blitzed 2, and then he was one-on-one. And if he was one-on-one, he didn't generally win. He always won. To me, he was the most underrated player of that first part of the dynasty. When he finally was traded to Oakland, I think they were Oakland at the time, the Raiders. He had made over $100 million here in Foxborough. He had already made all those Pro Bowls and All-Pro teams. He was the best defensive lineman really in the NFL. He really was in his prime, and he never got enough credit because the stats never jumped off the page. But Richard Seymour, if you ever do see this, congratulations, you well earned. The first player Belichick drafted that went into the Hall of Fame. Hopefully, it will not be the last. But he was the most underrated defensive player I've seen maybe in my entire lifetime, certainly of the last 20 years. And if you don't know, who Richard Seymour is, as far as I'm concerned, you don't know football. You don't really understand what football is about. The game has and always will be won. We can talk about all these quarterbacks that can run sideways and backwards and on their fingertips and throw the ball with their other hand. But the game is still won in the trenches. It is still a game of blocking and tackling. And when you're building a successful football team, any good GM builds it from the line out, meaning the offensive and defensive line. Because if you don't got an offensive line, and you can talk to any quarterback you want about this, okay? You don't got an offensive line, or you don't got a defensive line, that's it. you're playing from behind. You are playing from behind. Okay, a position of weakness. Those two areas must be a strength on your team if you are to have any chance. If you don't have those two things, it's very unlikely to happen. You have to have at least one. Okay, because if you don't have two, you better have at least one, or you're kind of, there's a few anomalies out there, but by and large, it doesn't usually happen. So Richard Seymour, congratulations. Congratulations to all the Hall of Fame inductees this weekend. That was great to see. I was making fun of Dick for male fact is he was a great coach. He took the Eagles to the Super Bowls back when probably half of you weren't even born yet. I think I was 6 or 7 years old. They lost to the Raiders when they had Jaws as the quarterback. Then he resurrected his career after he kind of got burnt out a bit, and then took the Rams to the Super Bowl and had a great game against the Titans and Aaron McNair. Remember that game came down to like a foot or whatever it was. But they had a great game there. And Kurt Warner, great story. He came out of nowhere and became a Hall of Famer. And Dick Vermeil was a big part of that. So congratulations to all of them. We're going to switch gears to the Washington. I'm laughing. The Washington Commanders. I'm not wearing a Washington Commanders hat, but we talk about everything and everybody here. I find it this is a very interesting thing. I am in this part of the country now. So the Commanders are the main draw here in Virginia. There are a lot of Ravens fans because Baltimore's just up the way there, and then there's a pretty large contingent of Patriot fans. But a lot of people around, at least where I live, are from other parts of the country. So there's a lot of teams in here. There's a Cowboy fan over there, there's a Steelers fan over there, there's a Jets fan back there, there's a Dolphins fan right over here. You got a guy over here from Ohio who doesn't like anybody. He likes Ohio State, who I keep trying to tell him, Mike, Ohio State is not a pro football team. They're just not. But because the Bengals broke through last year and look like they're going to be around for a while, he has a conundrum now. He may have to go out and get a Bengals jersey, which would not be a bad thing, would it, Mike? Come on, would it really, Mike? Come on. It would certainly make Sundays a little more fun if you had a jersey on. But I know, you'd probably wear it once and throw it out. Anyway, I digress. The bottom line is this. We are looking at the Commanders right now. They brought in Carson Wentz. I have to adjust myself for this because to me this is the single highest risk-reward move in the NFL this past offseason. If you look at his numbers at a glance, now again, this is if you don't know who he is and you looked at his numbers, you'd think he's a heck of a quarterback just by looking at the numbers. I mean, and when you do, we pull up his stats. He was with Indianapolis, so you don't know. He was with Indianapolis last year. They started out looking like a playoff team. All they had to do to get in was beat the Jaguars, who, do I have to really go into this about the Jaguars, where they were? Okay. And not only did they lose that game, they lost it in embarrassing fashion, and he was a reason why. But that didn't start with the Jaguars. He had a number of performances during the year against teams, contenders, where he pooped himself. He literally pooped himself. And he did it on camera, which is terrible because the whole world is going, this is the guy they paid all this money for to bring in and do all these things. And the Colts, by all accounts, should have been a playoff team and should have been a serious threat. But Carson Wentz made sure that didn't happen. So this is really his last shot. So if we look at these guys, or if we look at him, just taking a glance at Mr. Wentz here, his numbers, I mean, this is the thing that's kind of strange. He's in his 7th season. He's 29 years old. This is a big guy, 6'5", about 237, strong arm. He has the look, and last year, he was 27 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. I mean, that's almost a 4-to-1 ratio. Okay? That's a 3.9-to-1 ratio. Most coaches, if you close your eyes and you give them those numbers, I'll take that. I'll take that all day long. So at 27-7, it's almost a 4-to-1 touchdown interception ratio. So off the paper, he threw for 3,500 yards. They didn't have a lot of, the Colts weren't exactly, their receiving corps wasn't Hall of Fame. But still, 3,500 yards, almost 3,600 yards in that. I mean, that's pretty impressive at first glance. But then you think about, these games and who, the opponents and when he had these issues. To me, that's the measure of the man. What are you doing against the real competition in the big moments? When those games, do you remember when? The problem with Carson Wentz is whenever that phrase, remember when Carson Wentz threw the ball, like not looking at in the end zone, he got picked up whenever a touchdown. When he's going down, he should just throw it out of bounds or something. Do you remember when? Like, these are the remember whens with him. Okay, there's nothing noteworthy. It's all bad stuff. So I keep wanting to call them the Redskins, but I can't. So The Commanders, to me, took a chance here. For whatever reason, I've got a few Commanders fans around me here who are up and down swear that kid that they've had the past 2 years, Heineke, is not the answer. And I keep telling them that Heineke is not the problem, that the problem is in the interior, the offensive line. Plus, he had one real weapon, maybe two, but they were both injured for half or most of the year last year. So he's never had a full set of weapons at his disposal anyways. How do you know what the kid can do? Here's what I do know. When he was in the playoffs 2 years ago against Tom Brady, of all people, he almost matched him throw for throw. And that gave Tampa Bay a hell of a run. Tampa Bay won the Super Bowl that year. The Redskins, where they even called that then, I don't know if they were still, I think, the Washington football team, but they were right in that game until the end. And that's a playoff game against the greatest of the great, Jesus and cleats. And if he can do that against Tom Brady in that situation with no prior experience, then why don't you hitch your wagon to that guy? When has Carson Wentz ever done that? He's never done that. Like, that's his knock. In that moment, he doesn't. He craps his pants. But yet, here we are again. Heineke is looking up at this guy, Wentz, who better deliver. Look, I'm not rooting against the guy. I hope he does well. For the sanity of my fellow Commanders fans out there, I am praying he does well. Because if he doesn't, where are the Commanders at then? I mean, so he's coming in here. You look at this team. The wide receiver position. They signed McLaren to that extension. Very talented kid out of Ohio State, 26 years old. He's starting to come into his prime. He got hit by the injury bug last year too. But they've got they've got Sims and they've got Samuel. McGowan is a rookie out of Georgia Tech, who looks like he might be a speedster. And then they've got Calvin Harmon, decent, but and they got a bunch of anybody's and somebody's, highlighted by McLaren. So the other kid who came in last year, forget his name, he was a free agent, but he never really got healthy. He's there also. We'll see what they turn into. The offensive line's got to protect him. I don't know that if we're looking at at their draft, they being the Commanders now. I would have thought they started with Dotson, the receiver out of Penn State. They went and got a defensive tackle out of Alabama. That's never a bad pick. You should look at what Barmore was doing up in Foxborough for New England. He had a great rookie year until he got hurt. Second year, he's dominating training camp. Defensive players out of the SEC generally do well. So if your second pick is attached to Alabama, that's a good pick in my book until otherwise. Okay, until someone proves me wrong. So I like that pick there. But then when they got a running back, they went and drafted a quarterback, a safety. They finally drafted a tackle in the 7th round. To me, they addressed the defensive line. The defense really last year underachieved. A lot of that was injuries, but they were projected as a top 5 defense when the season started. Coming off the previous season playoffs, there was reason for optimism in the nation's capital because that defense looked like it was top 5 caliber. They completely knows that. They pulled a Carson Wentz, if you will. Part of it was injuries. Part of it was the ineptitude of the Washington offense to sustain drives and give them a rest. They spent a lot of time on the field. They had a tough schedule because they were a playoff team, so they ran up against a lot of high-octane offenses too. Outside of Dallas is Dallas, they've got an offense, but the other two teams in the division, Philly they're decent, but I mean the Giants are the Giants right now until otherwise. We'll see what the coach does, but. They could not really, as an offense, really sustain any consistency or find consistency throughout the year, and that put a lot of pressure on that defense, and they got banged up. So the hope there up there in the nation's capital is that defense can stay healthy. The offensive line can give this guy a running game because, look, and I said this before, and I'll keep saying it, the best friend of a quarterback is a running game. I don't care who you are. Okay, you have to be able to run the football and take some pressure off the squad. Any quarterback. I don't care if it's Aaron Rodgers. I don't care if it's Tom Brady. I don't care if it's Pat Mahomes. I don't care who it is. You've got to have a running game. You've got to have a sense of balance. You've got to have the threat of a run so that they can't pin their ears back and just go. Okay? Anybody who knows football will tell you, once you get a team one-dimensional, it's only a matter of time. Okay? So for the sake of Carson Wentz and his fan base, they need to establish a running game. They need to put some, the key numbers here are 10 to 12, as in 10 to 12 plays per drive. If they're doing that, that defense is going to get some rest, which last year they really didn't. Okay? and take care of the football. I don't really know off the top of my head where they were last year, but I'll look it up in terms of the stats. Turnover-wise, Heineke had 3,400. Heineke's numbers last year, 20 touchdowns, 15 interceptions. He completed 65% of his passes. He threw for 3,500 yards. I mean, his QB rating was 85. Not bad, but the 15 interceptions didn't help. So that's a problem right there. They did have, Gibson had a solid season, ran for 1,000 yards, averaged 4 yards a carry. Heineke was your second leading rusher at 300 yards. He averaged 5 yards a carry. So they did have the threat, at least a little bit. They ran for $121 a game. That's not bad. 4.3 yards a carry. That's not bad. So it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't anything. It wasn't the stuff where they weren't able to sustain drives. The receiving position last year, there was a huge drop off. McLaren, who actually, he did, for all the injuries, he was banged up. He played the whole season. 77 catches, 1,000 yards, 13 yards. He only had 5 touchdowns, but he was there. But the drop off after him, from 1,000 to the next guy, J.D. McKissick, who I don't think is even on the roster this year, 397. He was your second leading receiver last year. So after McLaren, there was a huge drop off in the passing game. Again, that receiver there who was hurt, kept being, we kept waiting for when he was going to show up. So I forget his name off the top of my head, but so they've got to get the running game again. Not bad, 121, 4.3 carry. That's not bad. But for whatever reason, probably because they only had one threat in the passing game, they were not able to sustain drives a lot, which put a lot of pressure on that defense. Which again, they had a lot of injuries. Not the most injured team, but they weren't not healthy by any means. So Carson Wentz has to make the smart play. It's okay on 3rd and 15 to throw the ball away. It's better to punt than to put your defense in a bad position. You got to play the long game. And again, he only had 7 picks last year, so and again, he didn't have them, but when he had them, they were big. They were at big moments. You can't have turnovers in big moments. It's better to throw the ball away and play field position. He's got to learn to do that. He's got to let his offense, or rather, he's got to trust his receivers. And again, McLaren looks like a stud. Okay, so he's got a legit number 1. The question is, who's going to be the number 2? Who are these 2 and 3 guys in terms of the passing game? If he's any kind of quarterback, he's going to have to help them a little bit. He's got to make good throws. He's got to lead them into the catch. He's not going to set them up to get their head taken off. And he's got to know when to throw the ball away, especially in big games. They if you look at their schedule, they start out with Jacksonville. I mean, out of the gate, they could be 3-0. Okay, they host Jacksonville, they're at Detroit, and they host Philadelphia. 3 very winnable games. Okay? They could be 3-0, and then they go to Dallas. Okay? The Cowboys have injury bugs. Their receiver, I forget who it was, he went down. He's going to be out for a while. They don't have a lot of weapons in the passing game. They have to lean on the run. They go into Dallas at 3-0, which is very possible, and you may have something. The first 3 games, they've got to win those first 3. There is no reason. Look, Philadelphia is going to be tough, but they're at home. They can beat Philly at home. If this defense is what it's capable of being, they should be able to beat Philly. So that to me is they got to be 3-0 going into Dallas, because then after Dallas they have Tennessee at home. Tennessee to me is not going to be what they were. They've lost a ton of weapons in the passing game. They still got the King, but the King has no passing game, and you can put 8 in the box. The King is the King, but the King ain't going to run against 8 all game. He's not. And then you got Chicago. No one I know, no one I've talked to, no one in the media is suggesting the Chicago Bears are the dark horse Super Bowl contender this year for the NFC. No one is saying that. So that's a very winnable game. Okay, then you've got Green Bay at home. I've been saying this since what's his name there, Adams there left, the receiver there left for Vegas, Devontae Adams, that Aaron Rodgers was going to take this one the worst out of the other quarterbacks that lost their number 1, their go-to guy. Green Bay by that point, who knows what position they're going to be in, because while they can run the ball, there's really nothing out there in the passing game that scares you, and they have not addressed that issue. So now by then I would hope, because that's week 7, that's late October, that Green Bay will have established a number 1. They damn well better have. So, but yeah, we'll see what that is. But that, to me, they're going to have them at home. Green Bay's offense doesn't scare me, and it shouldn't scare you. So they get a chance to go to a very good start. If they do that, then I mean, this doesn't look like that bad of a schedule. It really does not. I mean, after Green Bay, the Colts, that's going to be tough. Minnesota at home. Minnesota has offense. Minnesota's Jekyll and Hyde. At Philly, that will be tough. The Texans stink. They got Atlanta home. They stink. Right now, look, the Giants, until further notice, he's not here right now, but the Giants, to me, if Saquon Barkley is healthy, that's one thing. If Saquon Barkley is healthy, and that's a big if, because that's the toward the tail end of the season. That's December. By then, Saquon Barkley could be in street clothes. Okay, and who knows? So they've got them back to back, and they go to San Francisco. That's probably not going to be a game they win. They host Cleveland. They host Cleveland, and they host Dallas to close out the season. That is a very winnable schedule at first glance. Now, yes, it's early August. Injuries can happen. Injuries are going to happen. It's the question: who is it going to be, and when is it going to happen? But Carson Wentz, this is really set up for him to win, because that schedule is not that difficult. They've got a running back. They've got a number 1 running back. They've got a number 1 receiver. They've got to build some depth around that. The offensive line has got to give him time, and he's got to not make the big mistake, because the big mistake is what got him in this mess in the first place. Because he should still be in Indy or Philly or wherever, but he has this track record now, so he's got to change that image. And the best way to do it, take care of the football, meaning don't make the big mistake. Punt, punt, and punt. Because I don't care who you are, there isn't a defensive player on this planet that wouldn't prefer your team punting the ball 40, 50 yards and playing field position and making your opponent have to go 10, 12 plays to get a score. Any defense will take that all day, whoever the quarterback is. Just don't turn the ball over inside the 40. Just don't put us in that position. Some things are going to happen that aren't his control. Ball gets batted, or he's going to get blindsided. The lineman's going to get beat. That's not all going to be on him, but he's going to minimize those mistakes. If he does that, okay, and they punt and they play field position, and that defense is healthy, okay, this schedule sets up pretty favorable for them. I'm not from here, so I know there's a bunch of Commanders fans go, yeah, all right, I get it, okay? But 2 years ago, you were in the playoffs with the whatever, okay? And that kid, by the way, is still on the bench. I still think he can play. And I'm probably in the minority on that, but that kid wasn't the reason you guys stunk last year. To me, it was lack of weapons in the passing game. It was a banged-up defense, okay? So 15 picks is not good, okay? It's not good. I'm not saying that. But he was devoid of weapons. So he had one legit number 1, and after that, who knows what he had. When your next best guy doesn't have 400 yards and catches, you don't have a lot of weapons in the passing game. You just don't. So, and I'm not sure how many of those 15 picks were even all on him. I'm sure some of them were, but all 15 of them, probably not. So, but that's neither here nor there. Right now, it's Carson Wentz's team, and Carson Wentz needs to step up and do what everybody keeps saying. And but this number is dwindling. It's not everybody. It's down to, if we're being honest, it's down to Mr. Orlovsky there, Dan Orlovsky, who's the last guy on the Carson Wentz bandwagon. I'll tell you, I give Dan Orlovsky credit for this. He is incredibly loyal, if nothing else. And he's a quarterback. He's been in the league. He knows his stuff, and no one's questioning that Carson doesn't have talent. He does have talent. The numbers bear that out. But in big moments, he's got to do the right thing. And the right thing isn't always make the big play. It's sometimes throw the ball out of bounds, throw it away. Take the sack, but don't fumble the ball. Something like just don't make the big mistake that, especially in a one-possession game in the third or fourth quarter, that tips the scales in the hands of your opponent. He is notorious for doing that. And that's where he's got to change. So I'm very interested to see what he does. But I look at this schedule, it's very, very favorable. It just is, okay? Because there are teams on that schedule that, honestly, San Francisco is the best team they're going to face this year. And that isn't until December 24th. They're the best team right now they're going to face on paper. The other teams, that like the Dallases and the Green Bays and the Tennessees are not what they were. They've all taken a step back in terms of talent on the offensive side of the ball, and they're going to have Green Bay comes to Washington, Tennessee comes to Washington. So, the games that are on the road there, Indianapolis, I think is going to be tough. Yeah, that's when they can lose. At Dallas, yeah, absolutely. But other than those two, you tell me they can't go to Houston and win? You tell me they can't go to Chicago and win? Of course they can. You tell me they can't go to MetLife and beat the Giants? Of course they can. Or they can't go to Detroit and win? Of course they can. Those are all winnable games. And you got to win those games. And if this defense is what it was supposed to be last year, and he takes care of the football, they find a second receiver, okay, because they've got the starter, then this is very winnable. This is very favorable for them. Okay? So I'm going to lean towards cautiously optimistic here. I'm not going to give you a prediction yet on what I think their record should be. But when we do our NFL preview later on this month, we will give you predictions, promise you, on all these teams, what we think they're going to finish. And they'll be on tape so you can hold this to them. Okay? And we're going to close this segment out with that. We'll come back for one more mini segment on a little think piece. A little think piece, if you will. And I don't want to give it away. It's a surprise. It's a surprise for my man Tom Izzo, who I miss, and hopefully we'll be back soon. You guys get a quick drink, use the bathroom real quick. We'll be back on the other side for a quick segment 3. Talk to you soon.